All right, welcome everybody. It's great to see such a robust turnout on Monday morning of Climate Week. Thank you all for making your way here. I always feel really kind of humbled to be in this space. We did an event here last year, and it's a lot of gravitas to try to live up to in this room, so we'll do our best. I hope all of you realize that we actually planned to start this at 9:30 and there was a half hour of mingling, but it might have been lost on some people, and so I'm sorry if you arrived much earlier than you wanted, but hopefully you had a chance to say hi and talk to people. My name is Brad Ack. I'm the CEO of Ocean Visions, and we're co-sponsoring this event with the Sabin Center at Columbia University. And last year at this time, we did an event all about a high-level roadmap to prove or disprove marine-based carbon dioxide removal technologies and approaches by 2030, in the next 5 to 7 years. And that was because it's critical that we have pathways for carbon removal that are starting to be ready to be deployed at some point in the not too distant future. And in order to get there, we're gonna have to have coherent plans and approaches. So the high-level map was intended to lay out a pathway, and today we're gonna review what's happened over the last year, and I'm joined by some great panelists who will help elaborate that. We will have an ample amount of time for audience participation and questions. Then there'll be a short break. I think it's around 11 to 11:15, and then we have 6 startups in the space, 6 CDR, mCDR startup companies who are gonna each give 5-minute overviews of their technology and some of the obstacles they face and how they're overcoming them. So that's just an overview of how the session's gonna go. There's restrooms out the door. Feel free if you need to get up. There's water and coffee over here throughout. So, all right, so with that, I'm just gonna say a couple words about Ocean Visions. We're a small nonprofit organization that's just over 4.5 years old, and we work at the intersection of the ocean and the climate crises. We believe they are completely and inextricably linked, and that we won't have a healthy ocean without dealing with the climate crisis, and likewise, we won't be able to deal with the climate crisis without figuring out the role of the ocean. We sit in the middle of a network of pretty powerful and smart organizations that includes a number of science and academic organizations and oceanographic organizations. You can see the logos there. There's a number of people here in the room from those organizations, so thank you all for being part of the network. Our work is to try to catalyze effort from amongst this network and beyond to try to address the most critical challenges facing the ocean and come up with innovative solutions and approaches to doing that. So what's our assessment on what the biggest challenge is to the ocean and the planet? It's this. You might not be able to see this graphic exceedingly well, but along the bottom is 800,000 years of climate data on atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, carbon dioxide in this case, so not including methane or others. And you can see that over that entire period of time, atmospheric carbon fluctuated up and down in a range from about 180 to 280 parts per million. It tipped 300 one time. And then you notice that there's just a 1950 call out there. It's just a steep climb, just straight up, and continuing to go up, right? So we're now at about 426 parts per million, so about half as much as we've ever been, about 50% higher than levels that we've seen before, and there's no end in sight, right? So the question is, really, what is this gonna do to the planet and the oceans? This is also just a graphic to show that the rate of increase of atmospheric carbon is actually going up. So 2023, we saw the single largest increment, I think it was 4.5 parts per million, to that burden of pollution that is in the air all around us, trapping all of this heat. So, why is this an ocean problem? Why would an ocean organization be focused on this? Because there's 2 effects of this that are outstripping any other impact to the ocean. One is thermal stress. We're trapping an unbelievable amount of excess heat energy from the sun and 90-some% of it is going into the ocean, and that is causing a cascade of effects from sea level rise to interrupted mixing between the upper and mid layers to loss of sea ice, big storms, marine heat waves, deoxygenation, basically a cavalcade of really serious challenges that can't be fixed by anything other than ultimately bringing that atmospheric concentration back down. And then the second big stress to the ocean is chemical. So we're putting in, one of my colleagues calculated about 30 megatons, that's 30 million tons of weak acid into the ocean every day as a result of the deposition of 30% or so of our emissions. So thermal stress and chemical stress, that's why an ocean organization like Ocean Visions is focused on this problem. You might say, well, we've already got an agenda for that. You ought to go back to working on fisheries and marine protected areas. But then you have to say, well, how well is that agenda working? And unfortunately, as evidenced by the increase in parts per million in 2023, it's not working yet. It's on the path, right? We could see potentially a peak in emissions and a bending of the curve at some point, but we have not peaked yet. And in fact, we continue to add enormous amounts of embedded capacity for fossil fuel production and for emissions. So that graphic is shows $5.5 trillion invested since Paris in fossil fuel financing. So this is clearly an emission reduction agenda. While it has to be central and a focal point, it's not by itself potentially likely to work in time to fix our problems. So Ocean Visions works on what we call a more comprehensive approach to address the interlocking ocean and climate crisis. It's really easy to remember because we call it the 4 R's. So the first R is reduce. We have to rapidly and deeply decarbonize our society. And from our perspective, the ocean has a very significant role to play in doing that, whether that's the provision of low carbon energy, low carbon food, low carbon bioproducts, and certainly low carbon transportation. And there is a lot of underinvested areas there where the ocean is going to be a big champion in the just transition to a low carbon future. But we're here to talk about removal. That's our second R. We are going to have to take out very large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere at some point in the future to stabilize and hopefully restore some semblance of a stable climate. And that's gonna require most likely a role for the oceans. That's what we're here to talk about today. There is a chance that those two by themselves don't arrive in time to forestall really bad things from happening, things that we don't want to have happen, tipping points that will cause life on this planet to change in unknowable ways, but many of which are highly unpalatable and dangerous. So we also need to think about, are there things we can do to slow down the trajectory of some of these tipping points? We call that repair, you could call it restoration, regeneration. There's a number of different ways to frame it, but the idea is to work with existing ecosystems and try to avoid those tipping points. And then the last R is reach, which is all about building a broad global community of makers and solvers and diversity across all spectrums, geographical, cultural, economic, to really help solve this problem. Kind of like what we saw during COVID, but way bigger than that, way more international, way more equitable, way more distributed. So now on to carbon removal. This is a great report done by the University of Oxford. This is an image of the second year, which talks about where we are. If we need significant amounts of carbon, and they calculate that the Paris consistent scenarios that limit warming all are gonna require somewhere, and these are calculations that are subject to a lot of uncertainty, but somewhere around 7 to 9 gigatons of CO2 per year by 2050. So gigaton is 1 billion tons, so 7 to 9 billion tons of carbon being removed by 2050. And that's just to get to a target that's worse off than we are today, right? Let's just remember the Paris Agreement that we all signed to was not to make our world better, it was to make it less worse, right? And if we want to actually make it better and clean up this mess over some period of time, then we're going to have to do better than this number. But this is a number that's in the IPCC scenarios. to get to 1.5 or 2 and then be able to return to 1.5. So how are we doing from this same report? It's hard to see this graph, but the gray represents where we are with CDR today, 2.2 billion tons. The little sliver of rust all the way to the right is where we are with what they call novel forms of CDR. And so you can see that that includes BECCS, it includes biochar, and it includes enhanced rock weathering. And it is, 1.3 megatons, so 1.3 million tons. Compare that to 7 to 9 billion tons that we need, and you can see that we're a long way. The rest of the 2.2 is more conventional approaches like afforestation, which are probably maxed out. So it's unlikely, maybe that number can grow, but, and certainly DAC within that number might be able to grow, although I think it's considered novel, but we are going to need a lot of new forms of CDR to meet these targets. So here's where the ocean comes in. The ocean has a bunch of different ways that it already cycles carbon naturally. It's the largest biological, it's the largest carbon cycler on the planet. There's about 50 times more carbon at the bottom of the sea than there is in the atmosphere. And these are some of the ways that the ocean does that, but they break down roughly broadly into two big categories, biological and abiological. So biological is anything that uses biology, photosynthesis, is going to capture carbon, and then the question is, can you do something to more permanently and safely sequester it? Abiological is essentially using the ocean's chemical processes in order to transform carbon dioxide into carbonate and bicarbonate. We did a whole series of roadmaps about these, and I would, for those of you who are still kind of getting into this space, I would commend you to look at these. They broke down into 5 big categories of approaches in the blue, and then two approaches there on sort of enabling conditions. And they are a look at what do we know and don't know about the various technologies in each of these 5 areas, and what do we need to know. These were done in the 2022-2023 timeframe. And then last year, we put together this high-level map that sits above these roadmaps and basically tries to lay out an agenda and a scale of what that agenda is going to look like in order to get to yes or no, roughly, answers to whether these things are safe, durable, whether there really is additional carbon sequestered by about 2030, so that we can, you saw the numbers that we need by 2050. If we're gonna get to 7 to 9 gigatons by 2050, we're gonna need to be poised to be doing that by 2030. And if we're gonna be poised to do that by 2030, we've got a lot of work to do. So this high-level map, which you can also find on our website, breaks down the agenda into 3 big buckets: the science and engineering, all about the specific technology pathways, which if you stay till the end, you'll hear from 6 of the startups about those. The optimization of all of these approaches and how you would ever get to the scales that we're talking about. The scales are quite daunting. And then the enabling environment. This can only take place in an environment where there are willing actors and regulatory frameworks that allow it to happen. So this is the high-level map. Quickly, where are we since last year? We did a survey of field trials, and the good news is there are 53 mCDR field trials that are either planned, in operation, or have concluded, and you can see that they're distributed across the planet. Obviously, we need to 10x that. It needs to get bigger, and the field trials need to get bigger, but compared to where we were a year ago, this is positive progress, and I just want to make sure that we all reflect on the fact that we are moving in the right direction here and testing these approaches. This shows you which approaches are being tested. Across the top is mineral-based CDR, mineral-based ocean alkalinity enhancement. The next one is biomass sinking and biomass sinking in anoxic zones, artificial upwelling, deep ocean capture, and so on. So you can see this is where the 53 field trials break down, and you can also see that we're not getting full testing for a number of approaches. So this is just sort of part of the report card. And then my last slide is about the funding, because it's going to take billions of dollars to do this research. And just like the difference between billions of tons of carbon and millions that we're capturing, we need billions of dollars, and we're putting in millions right now. It's in the right direction. We're at 190 million total. This is a global figure for CDR, RD&D. That was in 2022. We don't have 2023 numbers. But you can see that in mCDR, it was less than 20 million. Again, this is in 2022. So the good news is, though, in 2023, that number started scaling up. Specifically, the US government has spent nearly $62 million on marine CDR research in FY23, and there's been around $25 million in philanthropic support. And these numbers have actually probably grown in 2024. So the rest of this panel is going to be deeper dives into different parts of this. What's the role of the US government in helping advance this needed research? What are other governments in the world thinking about? What does the private carbon market have to say about these issues, and how will it help or not help as we try to move forward? And then what are the governance frameworks? So with that, I'm going to start by introducing Danny Farrelly, who is currently serving as the Assistant Director for Ocean Science and Technology at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. And in this role, importantly for today, she is the co-chair of what's called the Fast Track Action Committee on Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal, which is working on a federal strategy, a national strategy for mCDR research. So without further ado, over to you, Danny.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you, Brad and Ocean Visions, for putting on this really needed for us to convene and discuss this emerging field. I'm excited to be here today to share a bit about the interest and priorities across the federal government, as well as within the Executive Office of the President, towards ocean climate actions, and specifically marine carbon dioxide removal. The President has set an ambitious US goal to achieve a net zero emissions economy by no later than 2050, and the administration is committed to exploring emerging next generation technologies such as carbon dioxide removal. And while all of us in this room are aware, and societies across the globe are becoming more, or realizing more, the critical role of the ocean in our daily lives and future, there's no doubt the ocean has been a victim to climate change, but we're coming more to realize and now acknowledging that the ocean can also be a powerful source of solutions to fighting the climate crisis. We embrace ocean-based solutions for the interrelated crises of climate, biodiversity, and equity. And I'd like to highlight with you today a few efforts we're undertaking to advance these goals across the federal government. It's really going to take collective action from all sectors and all present in this room. So I'm glad we're here and continuing to build these partnerships moving forward. President Biden often says America is the only nation defined by a single word, and that's possibilities. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, works to bring that idea to life by harnessing the power of science, technology, and innovation to achieve America's greatest aspiration. The role that we play, including providing advice to the Executive Office of the President on science and technology matters, but we also work across the interagency to create bold visions, unified strategies, and effective programs in science and technology. We also engage closely with our external partners, with industry, private sector, philanthropic organizations, and nations across the globe. Another role provided, and I'll be speaking a bit more to this, is the important way that we develop a common vision to help move both the federal government as well as society forward. This can be done through developing strategy documents, research agenda, policies, executive orders, and implementation plans. We work very closely with the Office of Management and Budget, as well as department and agency heads, to try to align this vision and align all of our priorities to make a stronger impact moving forward. I'd like to provide an overview of a relevant strategy document to this group, and that was released last year under the administration, the Ocean Climate Action Plan. Some of you may be familiar with this work, as we've been working diligently to implement it across the federal government and with our partners. It's been a critical component of the administration's plan to mitigate the climate crisis, protect biodiversity, and enhance the resilience of communities and ecosystems. It really draws the attention to the key role of the ocean, coasts, and Great Lakes in advancing ambitious climate goals and a whole of government approach to both mitigation and adaptation. In the next few minutes, I just wanted to share some of the plan's key messages and provide an update on the implementation thus far, including towards marine carbon dioxide removal. The key message of the Ocean Climate Action Plan is that there is no path to a healthy and livable climate without the ocean. And Brad laid out many of those examples that we're seeing in science that can validate and point us to the need to understand more. And there's no path to a carbon neutral future without the ocean. And so ocean climate action really is essential to achieve all of our climate goals domestically and globally. So the plan outlines 70 different specific ocean climate actions that underpin three main goals. The first goal is to create a carbon neutral future, outlining offshore wind and marine energy, green shipping, and marine carbon dioxide removal needs and technologies. Goal 2 recognizes that solutions can be found in nature, not only in technology. So identifying opportunities in blue carbon ecosystems and climate adaptive MPAs. And then goal 3 enhances coastal community resilience to ocean change, developing ocean-based solutions that can help communities adapt to the climate crisis. And this is through climate-ready fisheries and coastal climate resilience. And so if achieved, these goals will contribute very significantly to all of our common climate goals. In terms of implementation thus far, I wanted to highlight a few of the progress areas that we've made over the past year. This includes investing research and development in blue carbon habitats, development of an ocean justice strategy released last year at COP, and lastly, but important for this group, a call for substantial ramp up in federal research and development on marine carbon dioxide removal to guide the development and deployment decisions, protect human health, the marine environment, and potentially affected communities. To complete this task, what was alluded to earlier, the White House established a Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal Fast Track Action Committee. We say the mCDR FTAC, if you like your government acronyms. And so this interagency group, bringing together the subject matter experts from all relevant departments and agencies, is charged to characterize the full space and scope of mCDR in the federal research enterprise. It's currently in the final stages of completing our national strategy for marine carbon dioxide removal for release later this fall. And it will advance 3 specific actions. One is to clarify permitting, regulatory, and other standards and policies and establish guidelines for marine carbon dioxide removal. The second is to describe the most pressing federal mCDR research needs, again, to align that common vision and common goal across the US government and with our partners. And lastly, it will work to identify mechanisms to strengthen interagency coordination, promote awareness, and enable public engagement, and foster public and private sector partnerships regarding mCDR research. And so we know a variety of potential approaches are now under active investigation, some of which through the funding that was described both in FY23 and FY24. But a lot of this research is being conducted not only through the federal government, but through academia, industry, non-governmental organizations, and we've seen a lot of growing interest and growing dollars put into this space more recently. However, it's still very clear that significant questions remain, including how well does marine CDR approaches, how do they work? How well do they work? How much will they cost? What are the other impacts, both beneficial and adverse, that they might have to both people, the marine environment, and long-term change? Because of these many questions, there's a very urgent need for a research and regulatory regime that are mutually reinforcing. a comprehensive research program to build the knowledge needed to answer these critical questions about mCDR, in addition to a regulatory regime to ensure that mCDR can be safely explored and tested at scale in the field. And so this interagency working group has heard through various requests for public input, listening sessions, tribal engagement sessions, and other activities over the past year that we should take into consideration several specific items, including the need to ensure robust, sustained, and verifiable ocean observing that are in place and fit for purpose, develop standards for carbon accounting for various mCDR approaches, and design a plan for testing promising mCDR approaches. And lastly, but not least, evaluate the environmental and social impacts of mCDR. It's clear to advance in this space that multiple sectors and disciplines will be needed, and it's essential that we facilitate coordination and collaboration across all of the departments and agencies, as well as engaging with all of our non-federal partners to achieve all of these many goals and joint vision. And so we really look forward to engaging with the community present here today. We look forward to sharing more information when the strategy is released, and I hope to continue these conversations, continue to engage with all of the partners present here, and I really look forward to the conversation to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. There was a moment where we thought the FTAC strategy was going to be released today, and that this was going to be the event where we heard the details, but we were thwarted.
It is the government after all.
It is the government after all, so it's still forthcoming, but we're really excited about it, and it does show that there is significant attention to this effort. Before I go on, there are a lot of seats here for those of you who are standing. There's seats up here and around. Unfortunately, they're all tight, but if you don't want to stand the whole time, please feel free to find your way in. It'll be more comfortable. Okay, our next speaker, Arun Vignesh, is the Assistant Director of Global Partnerships from the Prime Minister's Office from the country of Singapore. Arun is helping drive climate change policy and strategies across the Singaporean government with a particular focus on high ambition international collaboration, green finance, and low carbon technologies. Singapore has shown itself to be interested and open to mCDR and is hosting at least one mCDR startup, and so we're really excited to have Arun here to share some of his thoughts from the perspective of Singapore on mCDR.
Morning, everybody. I will be, I think, slightly sprightlier than everybody else because I am still incredibly jet lagged, which means this is my 9 p.m. And I have had a running start. So thank you all for coming out today. Thank you to Brad and Ocean Visions for putting this together. This is a really interesting opportunity for us as Singapore to learn more from the community that's been working on this issue. And to share the first few steps that we've taken into the space and how we see the space potentially evolving. I'll start, I'm aware I'm a long way from home, with a little context about Singapore. So Singapore, very small. Our entire land area is roughly the same as New York City minus the borough of Manhattan. But one thing we have in common with Manhattan is that we're also incredibly crowded. We have one of the highest population densities in the world. The third fact is that we are a small, low-lying island state. About 30% of Singapore's land area is less than 5 meters above our height datum. And what that means is climate change is, for us, an existential challenge. And even though we contribute only a tiny fraction of the global emissions, we've set very ambitious targets for ourselves in the hope that that will spur action in our partners and the rest of the global community. So very simply, we hope to peak our emissions in the next couple of years, and by 2030 we'll be at 60 MT, and we'll be net zero by 2050. That's the goal we've set for the country. And we've put a slightly more onerous goal on government. All government agencies in Singapore under the Green Gov plan that was launched in 2021 are supposed to be net zero by 2045. So that's 5 years ahead of what we're expecting industry and households to do. The way we're going to get there is 3 stages. And I've got 3 R's, you had 4 earlier. The first is reduce. Obviously, the top line message to industry and households is if you can decarbonize your activities, please do. And there are support mechanisms in place and schemes to encourage that, even grants for households to buy more energy efficient appliances and other things like that. Second, replace. If you can replace what you're using with a cleaner energy source, please do. Now that is not as easy as it sounds for Singapore, because our geography, which has historically been a great strategic advantage for us, is in this case a real constraint. Most of the conventional and well-developed alternative energy methods are not really deployable in Singapore. For instance, we can't do tidal energy because waves are just not big enough. You can't surf either. Can't do geothermal. We don't have any geothermal sources in Singapore. And even we can't do offshore wind because most wind turbines require an airspeed that's twice what we get off our coast. And you'd think because it's really hot that solar would be the solution. The problem is if we cover all available surfaces within reason, we estimate that we'd only be able to generate about 10% of our current power need. That's not even accounting for growth. So for us, even that second R, as much as we'll try, and we've deployed solar on floating, we've deployed it on the sides of buildings even, means that we need to be alive to new technologies that might give us a solution outside what's currently available. And that's a third R for us, remove. So that's the context in which we've been scanning for technologies that can help us. And that's the context in which we found a partner in Aquatic, a company I'm sure many of you know well. We started speaking to them about 2 years ago, and last year, after a very successful initial trial, we went ahead to announce the launch of a full-scale demonstration plant in Singapore. This is a $20 million investment co-funded by our national water agency. So we've got skin in this game. And when fully operational, we hope that it will remove as much as 10 metric tons per day. Now, it's obviously not going to solve the whole problem, but we think it's a start. And it's most importantly, it's a start for us because it gets us thinking about what the benefits could be, how do we manage the risk associated with this, what's the regulatory regime we might need to put around these technologies to make best safe use of them. So that's where we are. The plant was announced in February. It'll be built and operationalized over the next 18 months. But I would think even at this point, there are about 3 broad lessons that we draw from this experience that we think might be helpful for other governments that are looking to get into this space. Now, the first and most important is this is about confidence. We were very lucky that given Singapore's small size and our historical water scarcity, we've developed an incredible group of water engineers and civic engineers who are able to do the work required to give assurance to other people in the regulatory system. I'm not a climate scientist. I am not an engineer. If you showed me this technology and told me what the downsides were, I would have no idea how to pass that out. But we were able to rely on the work that my colleagues at the water agency did, as well as the hydrological models that they developed over decades, to give ourselves some assurance that proceeding could be done safely and responsibly, at least at this scale. Now, the second is that this is ultimately a game of risk mitigation. There is a tendency to want the clean, perfect solution, but I think we're very clear that for many of the technologies we're dealing with, the path forward is uncertain. And we will need to figure out ways to manage risk, not try to eliminate it totally. And the third, and it follows on from the first two, is we need to do this at more than just a national scale. So Danny talked a lot about the work that the US is doing, which has been incredibly helpful and instructive to us as we think through this problem. Same, the roadmaps and work that Ocean Visions is doing on how to go through this. But at some point, that conversation ought go beyond just the national governments to the international one. There is a very active multilateral process in this space. There are very active discussions about it, but those discussions, even though we often say they must be led by the science, I think could be informed better by the work that's being done in this community. And I would invite, and this is my pitch to the room, I would invite the people who know this space well and who have scientific practice to bring to bear on the policy process, to please take that into that international space as well, to bring it into the IPCC process, to bring it into the UNFCCC process, because for many governments that may not have the advantages that others do, governments which may not have a core of water engineers, there is very few people they can turn to help them understand the risks and to make sure that they can proceed with confidence. So if I leave you with anything, it's that we were lucky. I don't think everybody else will be as lucky. And so there's a real need for the knowledge and the evidence in this room to be elevated to an international level and to be given the imprint that governments will recognize. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Arun. It's really great to hear the perspective of a country like Singapore thinking about how it's thinking about these issues. We tend to be a little bit insular sometimes, and this is going to have to be a globally distributed set of actions. It's not going to work under any other framework. So really happy to have you here today and look forward to the conversation with you. So next up, we really want to talk about the private markets and the role that they play in advancing or not advancing some of these early stage technologies. So we're really lucky to have James Lindsay here from Builders Initiative Investment Team. James is the Director of Investments on the investment team and works at the intersection between capital markets and environmental conservation. In his role, his expertise centers around reimagining ways to make impactful investments instead of more conventional models in both public and private markets. And I had a chance to look at his presentation, and there is a lot of really good information in this, so really excited to have you present.
Great, well, thanks for having me, and Brad, thanks for all of your work getting this set up. Before I get in, I usually present to investors, and I would love to see a show of hands, who's more of an entrepreneur or researcher directly working in the sector? Okay, about close to half or so. Great. Always refreshing to talk to people who actually are doing this. All right, so firstly, we are relatively new to how we're thinking about marine CDR as an organization. And high level, we represent Lucas Walton. He's a high net worth individual who wanted to build a new type of family office. Most family offices are very disaggregated, and they might have a very strong philanthropic initiative that's very separate from what their investment teams are doing in both public and private markets. So we've aligned all of our teams to think about ocean health, food and agriculture, and energy, which to us are kind of the three main categories of planetary health that we think we could have an impact on. We don't call ourselves a family office. We call ourselves an impact platform because our goal is to use all of the tools that we have for more good. So this means capital with support for the ecosystem. This can mean directly with our portfolio companies and our grantees, to just ecosystem building, and then of course amplification. We're trying to be very public about what we're doing, and we're actually about to release a relatively lengthy case study about what we've done in the ocean investment space, hopefully in a week or two. Like the White House, we thought we'd have that ready for this week, but we did not. Now, Builders has a bunch of tools, and many of you have heard of S2G, Seed to Growth, which is a venture-focused fund. That is one of our brands in the House of Builders. We have Builders Initiative, which is traditionally our grant-making team, which is very active in the ocean ecosystem. We have a very large asset management team that does very boring, big-picture things. Thankfully, I'm not involved in that very much anymore. And then we have Builders Bridge, which is where my time goes, where we're really trying to change the markets that we're working in. For oceans, it's a relatively straightforward problem statement. It's just an underdeveloped market. So we're spending a lot of time building the field, working with emerging fund managers, and trying to catalyze others to follow us into these areas. We're a little bit nuanced with energy and food and ag. Energy, we're trying to provide project financing for first-of-kind technologies in the big industries like cement and steel, and food and ag is focused on regenerative practices. Within the ocean investment category, we do a lot of different things, ranging from fund manager commitments in the VC and PE space. We support accelerators, working at the early stages, and we also directly invest, typically around a Series A window. We have a few core focus areas, and we've been expanding a lot more, as I mentioned, into CDR, because we're finding that the venture community, which is kind of our core community of partners, doesn't know what they're doing. There are a few sophisticated investors, some in this room, we'll talk about them a little bit more, but a lot of these climate investors don't even know what the London Protocol is and why that might impact a CDR play, which is incredibly scary when they're talking about writing a multi-million-dollar check, and they are fairly far along in their process. And so I'm not gonna cite this quote because it was from one of our partners who's probably in the room or may hear about this, but I thought it was a really good quote. And I think all of you realize this, particularly those that raised your hands a few minutes ago. This is not terrestrial CDR from a risk profile standpoint. The oceans are incredibly sensitive, and if we make a major mistake, we could have major impacts, whether it's destroying an entire fishery, whether it's ruining a nearshore coastal community. There's a lot that could go wrong quickly. So we want to be as responsible as possible as investors entering this space. Looking at the CDR, as everyone knows, we are very early in the life cycle compared to other core climate pathways. We can get nuanced and realign a lot of these very quickly, but we still have a tremendously long road ahead of us right now. And I'm gonna talk a lot about how DAC and CCUS type CDR pathways are much more mature. They're barely ahead of ocean CDR, so we're all in early innings here. So I'm gonna be a little bit dark later on, but in comparison, but I do fully acknowledge that they're not that far further ahead, despite getting a lot more of the capital. Looking at the landscape, we're tracking about 45 CDR startups, and I apologize if I missed you, and I apologize if we have you slightly mischaracterized on here. You're all doing great work. And as you all know, it's a very wide spread of pathways, which is great. There's lots of opportunities to get shots on goal, but it doesn't create consistency, and it doesn't allow for a lot of synergy when we think about research, particularly in the MRV space. It also creates a lot of confusion for the eventual carbon credit buyers, which the punchline for this entire talk on my side, if you can't explain what you're doing to the head of IR or chief sustainability officer at a Fortune 500 company, you're probably not gonna sell them credits, which is really hard for a lot of you to stomach. Especially when you realize how technical, particularly alkalinity and electrochemical pathways are. So yeah, high level, we're seeing a lot of different pathways. We are interested in all of them, but in different levels. When we look at the investor community, we've got a few vehicles with dedicated concepts. Propeller was one of the first funds we saw come to market with a dedicated portfolio target for some CDR pathways. We have some more philanthropic focused vehicles that are investing in the space or providing recoverable grants and things like that. And then we have some great platforms like Oceans Visions that are really helping build the field. And then if you look on the other side, we've got a few climate curious investors that are touching CDR. This will be groups like Lower Carbon, who was very involved in a few companies, to a few corporates who are investing once things have seen a little bit of scale, which has been really powerful to see, but they're not moving quickly enough. Like Brad showed, we see about 50-some field trials. We're probably using the same data set. We think this is great, a lot of progress, but when you consider there's 45 startups, it's a little bit concerning. So most of these ventures are either getting overfunded and dominating the project list, or people aren't even able to put their projects in the water, which makes it quite hard to prove what you're doing. And when we zoom out a little bit, we get very nervous about this space, as I mentioned, from the risk standpoint, but strictly from a public opinion standpoint. This isn't biochar for terrestrial CDR where nobody really knows what you're doing and a lot of people don't really care, and if you're using geologic sequestration, it goes down a wellbore. People don't realize what's happening. When you're operating on the water, people pay attention, particularly in the nearshore environment. So the list goes on, and I'm sure those of you, particularly in the regulatory world, know how challenging getting these communities aligned can be. All right, into the credits, the fun part. So many of you have probably seen data like this. We've seen a lot of influx of credit purchases, particularly kicking up in 23, which was phenomenal. But if you look at the pie charts, when we look at the pathways, which I hope you can all see this, the vast majority is going into BECS, and really it's all going into a biochar pathway, which that's great, relatively straightforward process, not that innovative. And if we remember Brad's opening slides, the little rust-colored tiny, 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 tiny piece was just a sheer fraction of the total problem, and it's all going into really one pathway. And then when we jump into marine CDR, it's even smaller. So I don't even know what that percentage is for the top graph, 2% or so is going into marine versus terrestrial CDR. I don't even think it's 2%. And then when we look at delivered credits, it's much lower. What's really interesting is the top buyers are relatively agnostic into where they're putting a lot of their money and credits right now, which is great. However, most of these are, I would say, the frontier investors, and they're doing it with a philanthropic lens in addition to what they want to do with their corporate goals. And I expect we won't see many newcomers in the Fortune 500 type list coming into this arena quickly. As most of you know, this is probably driven by the high credit prices, with the core ocean pathways being incredibly variable still. And when we look at the other pathways, it's a much clearer value proposition. So you're battling a sales pitch where the Shopify type person on the other side of the table has 18 other options that they know my dollar will get this much credit with much more certainty than where we are. So it's an uphill battle. And so far, we've been fairly slow. As I mentioned, we started thinking about this a lot more about 2 years ago. And when we're entering a new equation from a pathway standpoint, we usually start looking at allocation first. So we look to our fund managers in the VCPE space to start building the field, particularly at the earliest stages. So a lot of pre-seed and seed type investments. And we will start to directly invest when we start seeing more confidence. And what are we really looking for? One, a robust scientific pathway, that we see a pathway to de-risking the durability of the credits, which that's what probably half of you are working on. But what we really need is to see a business model that can be self-sufficient for several years, because we don't think the venture community will be there as consistently as it has for other climate technologies. That means you can't be able to fundraise on a dime's notice, which a lot of solar tech plays can do, and some of the more mainstream pathways in the transition. So you have to build a defensible business model. Meanwhile, you're dealing with incredibly inconsistent cash flows because you're getting large single purchases, so you can't forecast your sales pipeline. That makes it incredibly hard for you to underwrite your business, at least from our standpoint. So that's leading us down this path of we need to find alternative approaches. And what that means to us is how can we get more companies that are working on the same pathway to work together so we can get more scaled projects out there faster. We can get more types of capital involved, so it's not just venture coming in to invest on the corporate topco. So we can get more grant pathways, and I think that's gonna help this become a much more stable sector, because our biggest fear is we're going to see a lot of companies get overfunded and fail to deliver quality credits. They will collapse, and the buyers will not come back to the ocean sector. So a little dark, but I think everyone in this room is fairly sensible on this pathway and realizes how careful we need to be and how we need to set expectations in the market. So for that, thank you, and thanks again for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, a little bit dark, but obviously very real. And I'd love to know if anybody has done research, analogous research on a sector that is trying to prove its safety at the same time it's trying to raise money to do business. Is there a good analogy? I'll put that question out to the crowd, and hopefully in the audience participation, maybe somebody has one, because that is what's happening. That phrase of, we're trying to fly an airplane while building it. In this case, we're flying an airplane while trying to prove to people it's actually safe to fly in at the same time. Maybe that is an analog. Okay, we'll come back to that in the discussion. With that, the next and final presentation in this cycle is all around the challenges of governance. And you heard Danny talk about part of the FTAC plan is going to be around regulatory processes and permitting processes. So that's focused on the US. James mentioned the London Convention, London Protocol. There are a whole lot of international aspects of this question that are really thorny and difficult. And so we have probably the world's leading expert on this topic to talk about it next. Romany Webb, Deputy Director of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. She's a research scholar at Columbia Law School, Adjunct Associate Professor of Climate at the Columbia Climate School, and Senior Advisor on Climate Science at the Graduate School on Journalism. So, Romany, please.
Well, if we wanted to get dark, we put the lawyer last. So we've heard a lot about the great potential for mCDR to help mitigate climate change. We've also heard, I think from everyone on this stage, about the need for further research to fully evaluate the efficacy and impacts of different mCDR approaches, and we are starting to see some increase in funding for research coming from both government and from the private sector. Obviously, there's still a way to go, but there has been forward momentum of late, and we're seeing this sort of growing ecosystem of actors in this space. And so it's clear that there is a lot of momentum in this field. At the same time, though, there have been some setbacks of late, and I think there are some potentially significant challenges ahead. And so I want to talk about that in the context of governance, and I'm going to focus specifically on international governance. We at the Sabin Center do a lot of work on domestic regulation of CDR broadly and mCDR specifically, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But for this presentation, I'm going to talk about international governance, which is especially important in the mCDR context because, of course, we're talking about doing things in the ocean, and the ocean is a globally shared resource. So it's important that we have an effective global governance framework for mCDR. And when you talk to people about effective governance, obviously everyone has a different opinion on what effective means in this context, and there's many elements to it. But for today, I want to sort of boil it down to two key things. First, we need a governance framework that enables or supports mCDR research so that we can figure out whether and how these techniques might be used to mitigate climate change. At the same time, though, we also need limits. We need safeguards and controls to protect against potentially harmful activities and to ensure that we're proceeding in a safe, responsible, and just way. Now, obviously, these two elements can be in tension, and so we need to carefully design them and balance them in an effective way, and I would argue that that's not currently happening. We do see in the global governance regime currently both elements, the support piece and the controls, but currently they're developing quite separately in quite a disconnected way, and that makes the balance really difficult to achieve. So I want to start by talking about this in the context of the global climate change regime, the foundation of which is, of course, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, calls for the stabilization of atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference in the climate system. Now, under the structure created by the UNFCCC, developed countries were expected to take the lead in mitigating climate change, and they were to do that both by, you see here, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and by protecting and enhancing greenhouse gas sinks. And the definition of sink in the UNFCCC is very broad, could include all of these CDR approaches that we're talking about. So from the very beginning, the global climate change regime has supported the use of CDR, and that support has only grown in recent years. We see it in the Paris Agreement, which among many other things codified the idea of net zero, the idea that in addition to reducing emissions, we need removals to offset anything that remains. And over recent years, the parties to the Paris Agreement have adopted a number of decisions and resolutions that further emphasize the role of removals here. We saw that last year in the UAE consensus that was adopted at COP28. You see here the reference to accelerating removals. The year before that, at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was specific mention of the role of ocean ecosystems as sinks. So we have in this global climate regime this increasing support for CDR generally and mCDR specifically. What we don't see developing through this regime is the second element of what we need for effective governance, the controls, the safeguards, the limits. And that is actually being developed through a different set of international agreements in a way that's very disconnected from what's happening under the global climate change regime. So currently at the international level, there is no binding international agreement specific to mCDR. But there are lots of general agreements dealing with things like ocean access and marine protection that could have relevance to mCDR. I'm going to focus today on the London Convention and Protocol that was already mentioned as something many people don't understand. After this, at least everyone in this room should understand it, hopefully. So the London Convention and Protocol are a set of agreements that were adopted to deal with ocean dumping. There are some important differences between the Convention and the Protocol, but basically they both say that the dumping of materials into the ocean can only occur with a permit that's issued by a national government, and they impose restrictions on when governments can issue permits. Over the last 15 years or so, starting about 2007, the parties to the London Convention and Protocol have paid increasing attention to mCDR. And if you're wondering why 2007 was the year they started looking at this, that's because in 2007, the Planktos ocean fertilization project was proposed to occur off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. And that's really what put mCDR on the international community's radar. So the initial discussions were focused on ocean fertilization. Recently, the parties to the London Convention and Protocol have broadened their view to consider a range of mCDR approaches and some marine solar radiation management approaches. And they group those two together as what they call marine geoengineering activities. Generally speaking, the parties to the London Convention and Protocol have taken quite a skeptical view of these marine geoengineering activities. Arguably, the most important action that they've taken is the adoption in 2013 of this amendment on marine geoengineering. This amendment was adopted back in 2013. It hasn't actually entered into force yet, so it's not, strictly speaking, legally binding, but it is highly influential. You see here, it says that parties to the London Protocol must not allow the placement of matter into the sea in connection with a marine geoengineering activity that's listed in Annex 4, unless the listing indicates that the activity may be authorized with a permit. Many of your eyes just glazed over. So let's break this down a little bit. This applies to, regulates the placement of matter into the sea in connection with marine geoengineering. The definition of marine geoengineering here is very broad, would include a suite of mCDR approaches, also, as I said before, a suite of solar radiation management approaches. But importantly, in order to be covered, a marine geoengineering activity has to be listed in Annex 4. And because the international discussions were prompted by this Planktos ocean fertilization experiment, currently only ocean fertilization is listed, and the listing says that permits can be issued for ocean fertilization research, but nothing else. So no deployment can be permitted. That raises the question of how we differentiate, right, between research and deployment. The parties have developed what they call an assessment framework to guide that process. Basically, it's a two-stage review. You start with what's called an initial assessment that's designed to determine whether a project has the proper scientific attributes to be considered legitimate scientific research, and then you do an environmental review to determine if it should go ahead. As part of that initial assessment, when a country is trying to figure out if a project involves legitimate scientific research, these are the things that they look at. And you'll see here this sort of second main bullet is about projects not being influenced by economic interests and there be no financial or economic gain from projects. This has raised a lot of concerns because given the massive amount of funding we need for research in this space, a lot of it's coming from the private sector, including through the carbon markets, and there's a question as to whether that's sort of legitimate under this framework. We don't have a lot of experience applying this framework, just a couple of cases have applied it. So, as I said before, this only applies in the context of ocean fertilization, but the parties have suggested that they might take the same approach to other mCDR approaches. They've been particularly focused on ocean alkalinity enhancement and seaweed cultivation and sinking in this context. There has, for a number of years now, been discussion about listing additional activities under that 2013 amendment. That hasn't happened, and it looks increasingly unlikely that it will happen. There is, for various legal reasons, a view that actually the 2013 amendment cannot be further amended. But there is talk about adopting a resolution that would sort of lay this out for other mCDR approaches. And there's some talk that that may happen this year at the meeting in October. There is a resolution circulating, a draft resolution circulating. So I'm almost out of time here, but I do want to spend just a few seconds talking about why the parties to the London Convention and Protocol are taking this sort of very strict, restrictive approach to mCDR. And this is a quote from a report of the meeting that was held last October, in which they sort of raised a few different concerns. One, it's clear that they are concerned about the potential risks that these activities present. And second, they are very reluctant to consider their potential climate benefits. There's a few different reasons for that. Some parties say, well, climate change is a matter for the UNFCCC and the global climate change regime. We're not going to deal with that. Other parties seem to sort of question whether mCDR or marine geoengineering is even effective in addressing climate change. You see this statement here that parties are saying efforts should be focused on reducing the causes of climate change rather than mitigating the impact. I would argue that this actually represents a real misunderstanding of mCDR and the role it's meant to play, but also of international environmental law. It reflects this very siloed view that climate change is a matter we can deal with over here in the UNFCCC framework, and anything related to the ocean we should be dealing with over here. What we really need, though, is for those two regimes to develop together so that we can bring the support that we see developing under the UNFCCC framework and the limits and safeguards that we're developing through other forums together and appropriately balance them. So I will leave it there. Sorry, Brad, I went a minute over.
Do you have another slide?
I do not.
Okay.
It's just me.
All right. Excellent. That was actually just right on time. So thank you for that. And yeah, well, I guess those last two presentations clearly show that there are some hurdles here that we're going to have to overcome. And there's a lot of really smart people in this room and in this sector thinking about how to do that. So we're going to take audience questions and comments here in a minute. So just think about what you might want to ask. I'm just going to ask a couple of follow-up questions. And maybe I'll start just with the last presentation first. So with Romany, this sort of reluctance to consider climate impacts that you mentioned is just shocking to me, actually. And I wonder, is there any, in your experience in international law, this kind of risk assessment framework? Because obviously doing nothing represents a sizable, substantial, visible, measurable risk, and yet it seems to be sort of a risk versus no risk calculation in these international bodies. Is there anything in your knowledge on that particular topic, or any opportunity that we might take to introduce that sort of thinking?
Yeah, I will say that I think part of the reason why the parties are taking the approach that they're taking is because they're taking a precautionary approach, and the precautionary principle underlies much of international environmental law and is a very sort of influential doctrine in international environmental law. We have seen after these statements at the October meeting last year that I talked about, there has been some sort of pushback against this and some suggestion that actually the parties do need to sort of weigh the risks that climate change presents against the risks of these activities. Some of that is coming from a group called the GAZAMP group, the group of experts on Scientific Marine Policy, something like that, which advises the UN system on matters of marine protection. And they have a specific working group on marine geoengineering, and actually the co-chairs of that put in a submission to the parties to the London Protocol and London Convention saying, actually, you do need to take this risk-risk sort of assessment approach, and there are previous examples of you having done that in other contexts, in fisheries contexts and others. So it will be interesting to see what happens at the next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for October this year. Marine geoengineering is on the agenda, and so there will be some discussion of this at that meeting.
Thank you. For James, so we could think about carbon removal as, and other people have said this, I didn't coin this, global waste management. And if we looked at that sector and how that developed, you know, first of all, there was just dumping everywhere of human waste and all of our trash. And then eventually government stepped in to create a system to collect waste, and then eventually they were able to monetize that, and we all pay for it in places where there's waste management. Are we out of sync here in terms of how this field is developing? Is it even appropriate at this point to be thinking, or how much should we be depending on private investment versus what would you put as the sort of calculation between private investment versus public investment in this space and de-risking?
If we were going to put a percentage on that, I don't know the right number, but I would say 5%, something very low, and it should be going
private.
into, yes, on the private side, going into the innovation and at least proving that these pathways exist. And until the consumers are able to pay for it, whether it's directly through whatever, consumption tax, fuel taxes, whatever we want to call it, or through government subsidies, which is a consumer payment at the end of the day, that should be the bulk of the long-term business of this. I don't think that is within reason for the next 20-ish years, or however long we think it would take to have a lot of influence politically, especially with the back and forth, particularly in US, that we're having with our elections and their beliefs on climate change. And no matter what, I think we will continue to see a back and forth. I'm not here to be a policy expert. We have others for that. But nobody, I think, will push on this for the near term to get to that 90% funding levels, to get to the waste management. So we all just pay, what, $25 a month for our local trash collection in most of the country, something like that.
So what about if there was an international cost to carbon pollution? How would that change the equation?
I think that would accelerate very quickly. I think we're a long way away from getting a strong baseline.
Okay.
And the validation of what a CDR credit really means versus some of the more terrestrial pathways will take decades to really prove to the level that some other pathways have been.
You know, there's a lot of research on the social cost of carbon in the US. Actually even put a number on it. I believe it was during the Obama administration, wasn't it? And it was a lot, in the $140 range, something like that per ton. You know, and yet there is absolutely no cost to carbon pollution, right? We just allow it for free, and until I have a hard time saying until we change that regime somehow that we build any industry large enough to confront this problem. I want to turn to you, Arun. So you mentioned quite clearly Singapore had very little to do with this problem, and that's true of many countries around the world. You know, there's really a few of the big ones that have created most of the problem. But what do you think, is there a role for some of these countries in being part of the creation of the enterprise, presuming that there is an economic benefit to it, to really, you know, ocean nations, small ocean nations, to be able to move this sector forward and be able to gain a maritime economy from it, a blue economy from it?
Well, I'm not certain what the pathway to economic benefit from mCDR is based on where the technology is right now. But conceptually, yes, of course. I don't think anybody is sitting here going, I don't want any of the upside because I wasn't part of making the problem. Singapore is very active in carbon markets, which operates on precisely that basic logic.
So what about the role of a country like Singapore in helping move international opinion on this? I think there's we just heard from both of the last two presentations that there's a real reticence to consider, even though it's in the framework convention, that this is a sink, but it's not being really taken seriously that way. Is this on the international policy agenda for your country?
Well, it's part of the discussion we have with partners internationally, but I don't think we have that conversation very openly and aggressively. We negotiate at the FCCC as part of the Small Island Developing States group, and there's a very robust conversation within that group about how we treat new technologies, particularly CDR technologies.
Is it a positive conversation?
It goes back and forth.
Okay, because it seems to me the Small Island Developing States could be a enormous political power in this space, a very strong voice of influence.
If they can be persuaded, they will be incredibly, incredibly powerful advocates for this, absolutely.
Okay. All right, my last question before turning it to you, and this is for Danny. So it's not clear to me how CDR fits into the government's plans. Does the US government have a plan for net zero? I mean, I know we have a goal for net zero, but do we have any plan for net zero and understand how much of that net is intended to come from CDR? And if so, like, what would be the path to accelerating to get that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and described through the Department of Energy's carbon dioxide removal strategy in their framework. We see many tools in the climate toolbox and many different CDR approaches, including mCDR. And I think there's so many varying levels of technology and readiness in terms of the approaches to really put a number on it at that point. And so we know we don't have specific numbers for each of those, but we really do see all of the techniques in combination are needed to move the needle forward. And there won't be a one-size-fits-all solution that is advances in a silo. It'll be integrated across many techniques, across many sectors, and across many different geographies. There will be very different needs.
So, I mean, lots of countries have plans for net zero, and it's important to point out that the net part is the part that we don't get from real zero. Real zero would be complete abatement and removal of all emissions, and the net part means you're going to take some out. And it just strikes me that without a national CDR plan, it's pretty hard to know what we're shooting for. Do you know of any country that has focused on setting any specific targets for CDR as part of their climate plan?
I will say that as part of the move to sort of mitigate concern about moral hazard, this idea that CDR will displace emissions reductions, and there is increasing talk of countries and companies developing what are called twin targets, where they set separate targets for emissions reductions versus CDR, and there are a few of those that have been developed in Europe. I think I just taught a class on this last week, but I'm forgetting the countries. I think it was Switzerland, and there's a couple of European countries that do have specific CDR targets.
Thanks. Okay, we have two colleagues with microphones, so if anybody wants to raise their hand, I see a number of hands. Okay, we'll go to there first and then down here in the front. Okay. And please try and make your questions relatively brief, or if you have a statement, make it brief as well.
No statements. Hi, thank you again for great presentations. This question is for Romany. I'm not a lawyer, but the way I understand it, the LCLP has exemptions for research-focused deployments, right? It's basically to assess if mCDR can be done, what's the right way to do it. But the promise for mCDR is the large volume of high durable credits it can, carbon can remove. Right, and those will happen easy and high seas, like that's where the big volumes will be. So if this research shows that it can be done in the right, responsible way, we ultimately need commercial deployments happening there, because that's where it'll happen. So if LCLP is not working on commercial deployment aspects, who is? Because people often say BB&J as a great example, but that took 10 years in the making plus. And we're in a race against time. So if LCLP is not looking at commercial deployments, is there anyone else working on that? Thank you.
I mean, the short answer is no. The idea with the LCLP discussions is that at this point, we are not ready for deployment. We will allow research to evaluate these approaches. And then in theory, depending on what that research shows, you could see a deployment framework developed under the LCLP. That would take significant time and would be a complex process. There is talk about the BBNJ, the new Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction that was adopted under UNCLOS last year. There is talk that that could become a framework for mCDR on the high seas in particular, and there are some provisions of that that could be particularly useful here around environmental impact assessment and around what are called area-based management tools, ABMTs. But that agreement, like the text has been adopted, it's been ratified by some countries, but not enough to enter into force, and it did take 10 years to negotiate. So it's a ways from being an effective governance framework for deployments.
Sir, and then over here for the next one.
Thank you. This is extremely interesting. I'm here from Ecosystem Marketplace, where a nonprofit that does research on environmental markets, including carbon markets. And in the last year, our research has really focused a lot on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement ahead of the COP taking place in Baku. And so this question, I think, is more for Arun and Danielle. But I'm wondering, in Singapore and the US's strategies around carbon dioxide removal and mCDR in particular, what sort of positive approaches to encourage that do you see eventually taking place, given that CDR occurs not only in national waters but international waters? And then how might that affect the trading of credits related to mCDR or other approaches within Article 6 markets or non-market approaches?
Thanks. Arun, do you want to take that first and then Danny?
Sure. That's a great question and something we're thinking more about now. We're thinking about it specifically in the context of nearshore deployment, which is a little easier to map onto our Article 6 cooperative approaches. We haven't thought about high seas deployment, which would be an entirely different thing. So the short answer is yes, that is something we do need to line up if we intend to deploy these things with the right incentives, but we don't think we're at a place yet where we'll need to write those rules out specifically.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'll just add that I think a lot of our focus has been within our own exclusive economic zone, and stepping out into the international space and international waters, as you've heard, is extremely complicated and messy. And with the ongoing discussions and conversations, we really need a clear understanding there before trying to set that into our own space.
Romany, anything from the BB&J that is relevant to?
No, not directly relevant. I mean, there has long been a debate about whether activities on the high seas could qualify within the global climate change regime, and whether and how countries might use them to apply against their own indices or in the context of trading. It's an area that really it's been talked about, but hasn't received a huge amount of attention or resolution.
Sure.
Hi, how's it going? First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. I work in macroalgae processing, so hopefully that's something that sort of takes more of the pie over in the investment chart. So basically, I've heard it as a core premise in the CDR community that it's like, oh, like the oceans can store a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere. Like, I've even heard sort of a worrying statement that it's almost like, like, because right, you want investment money. I've heard it's like, oh, the oceans are an infinite carbon sink. But sort of like going back to like high school chemistry, like Henry's law, right? So like as the oceans warm, right, like sort of the gaseous solubility decreases, right? So like sort of like a warming can of Pepsi, right? So as the oceans are warming, a lot of the CO2 that you're packing into the oceans, what if they're sort of like just bubbling back out? Like, is that something that has been raised at these sort of financial circles and so? Yeah.
So fortunately, we have our chief scientist who's a biogeochemist who I'm going to turn to. over here to just give a short answer. I mean, without making people glaze over on chemistry.
Hi, everyone.
Dave Kowick.
I'm Dave Kowick. I'm the Chief Scientist at Ocean Visions. I was actually thinking that I was going to turn this over to David Ho, who's an international expert in air-sea gas exchange, before I was so quickly put on the spot. But I'll just say quickly that, you know, continuing to use the oceans as a carbon sink requires that we continue to do things that protect the carbon that's stored in there and continue, as you mentioned, to use Henry's law to our advantage so that there's a gradient such that the carbon dioxide wants to enter from the atmosphere into the ocean. So those are the two conditions you have to meet and maintain in order to continue to use the ocean as a carbon sink. Happy to talk about this more one-on-one, but I'll pause there for the benefit of everybody.
And on your point, do the financial players know this? You have to assume 90% of the investors have not taken anything beyond 10th grade chemistry. And I mean that half as a joke. I always like to joke that allocators are actually not smart people. And I am one, so take my commentary with that grain of salt. But the vast majority have very little concept of anything beyond basic pHs. And, you know, thinking about a Boyle's law, like completely foreign to them. So it's pretty rare that you get people that came from a background that informs them of that. And when they're looking, you know, the biggest sources of capital, like the pension funds, the insurance funds that manage billions and allocate into these markets and really are the venture capitalist bosses indirectly, they won't even look at that part of their pitch deck. And when they have, you know, whatever company in their underlying portfolio, no concept of what a durable carbon credit means versus what would happen if we do see another 3 degrees C of change in atmospheric temperatures and how that will start releasing. It's just so foreign to them.
I mean, it comes to your point about everybody's point that de-risking is going to be there's going to be a large public investment in de-risking and doing the science that starts to answer critical questions about how this moves forward. So you still have a mic? Okay, well, there you go. We'll go there and then over to Craig, and we've got a lot of questions, so let's try and keep them quick.
Sure, yeah. Hey, Marian from Remover, a nonprofit working with CR startups in Europe and India, and including mCDR startups who are struggling to raise capital. So this one maybe to you, James, who, based on what you said, I would consider a smart allocator. So I think you have done more than 10th grade physics. I wonder what would need to change for you to move away from the sidelines and for the others, such as Contract and others, to feel more confident in investing in the mCDR startups. What would they need to show you in order to feel confident?
We would need to see, as I mentioned very briefly, a sustainable business plan, which means can you get access to enough capital, whether it's from private capital like builders, whether it's from high conviction grant pathways, to give you a real shot at just testing a pilot. 90% of what we see on a day-to-day that comes across our desk is raising, you know, a $4 million Series A, and that's meant to last them a year and a half. That's not meant to put any projects into the water or develop any real hard tech if it's an MRV-related play. It's really just their top co burn rate. That's throwing good money into a pit of inferno. And no offense, and especially if you're at that stage, that's your life, I get it. But if you can't attract multiple sources of capital, we can't get involved. And we're a huge pool of capital. We represent a multi-billion-dollar platform, but we have restrictions on how we invest. We have to think minority ownership. Most investors have to do the same. So you now have to get 5 or 6 people that are willing to write you $1 million or $2 million check before we can come in. So what really seems to be working is when there is a strategic partner, a corporation that's getting involved very early, because they often can run the actual project side of it, so it alleviates a lot of that burn for the investors. And then we can really look and say, okay, yeah, you have 3-4 years to prove your business model, and then can become a self-sufficient business or be very attractive to other investors that might not be as interested in the impact of what you're doing, like your first round investors probably will be.
Great, Giovanni, and then we'll come to here, Carrie over here in the
Hi, everybody. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm Giovanni Coppini from Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change in Italy. Your opinion on the need of investing on coastal restoration, because I think it's, let's say, still deserve and need a lot of investment in decreasing the cost and improving the technology and the science behind, and make it accessible globally. So I think it could be fast track should be deployed, and Ocean Vision and Cost Predict globally, I think, could support a lot. So,
thank you for that comment.
Thanks so much for the great presentations. I'm Emily with Third Derivative, a program of the Rocky Mountain Institute. One thing that's clearly so beautifully complex about marine CDR is the need to develop so much in lockstep. So we heard a lot about this today, from policy and permitting to investment, go-to-market strategy, actually the research and deployment. And my question for you all is, how are we coordinating as an industry today, and where do you see gaps or areas where we could improve on that?
That's a great question. How are we coordinating?
I think that's for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think I'd say poorly, you know, because, and it's not a knock on anybody. Everybody is so busy trying to do what they're trying to do, and it's an uphill climb that there has not been the time to come back with a coordinated strategy. So I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing the national strategy to see what it tells us. But in the nonprofit, non-governmental sector, we need to come together around a clear strategy. Our high-level roadmap lays out the areas, but it doesn't yet say who's doing what and what's the probability that they'll get to the outcome we need, and then what's the gap. We've talked a lot about doing that, and we're hoping to advance that conversation over the next 6 months and come up with a more clear understanding of what the current trajectory is going to get us, and what the gaps are, and how we fill them. It's a great question. So Craig, and then the gentleman next to you.
Yes, thanks for continuing this forum, Brad. Year two, very appreciative of it. So first, a comment on international science. This is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. I don't see very much action going on in the 250 projects of the UN Decade, and it's a wonderful opportunity, but it's not there. So I would suggest that another international body be considered for the delegations here and beyond, which is the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. It's a UN body, and they exclusively exist to coordinate international ocean science. It needs to get on their radar, and I don't think it's anywhere near the center. Second point, and please, for the panelists, if an industry develops a technology and protects it as proprietary information, the efficacy will not be disclosed to the public in order to assure that whatever harms we seek to prevent may be real or fictional. So does anyone, perhaps on the governance side or industry, assay, federal, or a nation's interest, have some comments on how much of the methodology that some of the folks in this room are developing needs to be made public and verified, and how, without destroying a business model? Thank you.
Excellent question. Who wants to take a bite at that?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll just add that we're actively looking into, and this goes to the previous question as well, how do we establish sustained mechanisms and ways to have the federal government partner and create this collaborative community and environment to both share information, share results, share technology? What does that transparency look like? What does that process look like? And who is holding everyone accountable? So we're actively looking into what options might exist out in the space. The Department of Energy has really great examples of different sectors and fields where they can work together with industry more closely, and some of those burdens are taken down. So hopefully more soon, but we're looking into how do we establish those mechanisms and create that two-way of communication and further all of it.
I wonder if the FDA process is at all analogous here, where you have to submit to an agency and you have to show them your intellectual property, but it doesn't have to become broadly public. Is that possibly something like that in the plan? Somebody who signs off on the safety without necessarily divulging IP?
Yeah, we've certainly looked into examples from FDA and other agencies, and a big component as well is indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge, and how are we respecting those types of research and knowledge holders and their ways of life, and how can that then be used to inform greater scientific processes under mCDR. And so there's a lot on the data management and technology development side that needs to be taken into consideration, and it needs to be managed on a more holistic and all-encompassing focal point.
And is that one of the risks you see potentially as an investor, that IP becomes public in this de-risking process and then you lose your investment?
Yes, it's a big risk. We, of course, with our intentions, are a little bit less worried about that. We would love for the tech to be propagated and scaled everywhere. And we actually spend a lot of time thinking about impact management, whether it's the quality of a carbon credit, whether it's the various stakeholders involved. And we're not sure what our practice will look like in the long term, but we are starting to think about how do we create more comprehensive assessments of the underlying impact. This will be, we pay for LCAs, things like that sometimes. We also are now looking for a good example of our first project to really look at the other stakeholders. So we'd be engaging a third-party consultant to come in and conduct literally hundreds of interviews of all stakeholders, whether it's First Nations that might manage a fishery that could be impacted by an open ocean project, to landowners, to whatever industry is acting in the area, whatever people have had their jobs changed. And we, in theory, would like to publish this types of information because one of our mandates is to try to be first and lead the sector. How we go about that, a little bit to be determined. We're still kind of early in our journey. We've only been public for about 2 years, but we are thinking about it. So hearing that that's a big concern from even this community is very good to know, and we should be thinking about that.
Great. And just as a reminder, we are going to have pitches from 6 startups after we take a break as we conclude this part of the session. And so if those of you who are going to stick around, that's, that'll be interesting to hear their thoughts on that question as well. So this will be the last question, and then we're going to take about a 15-minute break. People can leave if they need to, but hopefully you'll stay, and then we're going to transition into these 6 5-minute concise pitches. So, sir.
All right, thank you. So I participate in research in environmental economics, and I've recently engaged in some efforts in estimating a framework on the social cost of plastics, and when the social cost of carbon got mentioned, got me thinking, there's usually a lot of overlap between all these topics that we are currently discussing, and it seems that we're still working in silos, and I think this question, it's directly to you, James. What about bundling all these initiatives? One of the things that we noticed in our research was that there are these blurry lines between the social cost of carbon and the social cost of plastics at the upper stages of the plastics life cycle. So what is stopping us in driving this common language, in driving all the investments so these frameworks are further explored? You mentioned that the social cost of carbon will be a catalyzer for this kind of technologies, and so why not bundle, create all this diverse and options for investors where they can actually try to also understand what's going on?
I like where you're going. I think that would be a very sensible choice. I don't think the financial community is sensible, and it generally doesn't like to collaborate. Most pools of capital are designed to be opaque. They don't want to know, they don't want the public to know what's in their portfolios in case something goes wrong, whether it's something small, like you have a factory that explodes and there's loss of life, whether you are PG&E in California and have Aaron Brockovich made about you down the line. So that's a major challenge that will require such a philosophical shift that I don't think it's realistic, sadly. And then when we are in the community of people that do want to be collaborative, like a lot of these family offices and some of the other pools of capital, like the California pension funds are starting to be much more progressive about climate. There is interest, but you're running into kind of the question about where Brad said he's not doing a good job building the ecosystem, which I don't think is true. You're doing a great job. That's a really hard skill set to build from who's leading its standpoint. It's really hard to get the right sources of funding because, I mean, even for us, we think plastics are an ocean problem and we invest in it out of the ocean portfolio. Most of our peers don't. They're like, what are you doing? That's not ocean, that's, you're investing in a sorting facility in Thailand. Like, what's that got to do? And we're trying to stop plastic from becoming ocean-borne. There's just such a discrepancy. And when you have teams that have specific fairways that they are mandated to invest in, them crossing over just creates such a chaotic hurdle that I don't think it's realistic. And then throwing in the difference in maturity, plastics being such a much more mature from a recycling standpoint compared to where most CDR pathways are, I think it'd be a really hard partnership to build. The analogs there, I think, are great, but I don't see anyone trying to build something like that. I mean, frankly, I think the priority should be more partnerships just within the CDR space itself, so we can get large-scale projects with multiple innovations being deployed at or near the same time with strong MRV, so we really can have a few best-in-class examples. Maybe then we can get cute, move into plastics.
Great, thanks. So I just want to close this part of the session with just a few more comments, very brief. Part of why we're seeing the challenges that we're seeing is that we collectively have a total lack of urgency about this problem. Right? I don't know how many of you are like me. I get on a daily basis articles and studies and reviews coming across my desk that indicate that the problem is far worse than what the media is talking about, far worse than what your neighbors and friends and colleagues understand, and our response is just tiny relative to the risk. If that shifts, like we saw with COVID, and we saw an international mobilization of effort, resources, brains, time, we could do this, right? Until it shifts, it's gonna continue to seem as difficult as maybe it sounded today, but that shift can happen like that. One thing we need is far more regular daily media coverage of this kind of studies that we're all seeing about what's happening in our biosphere. And again, that could shift. So when the urgency is there, we can do a lot of great things. We can put a price on carbon. We can rapidly accelerate RD&D. We can rapidly change the context in which these things potentially roll out. So keep that in mind, and let's all go out and really keep talking about what we're doing, try to mobilize more people, and and make this happen. I want to thank all of you for being here today. If we can thank the panelists. I invite you all for a coffee, and I don't know if there's still any snacks over there, and a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back with the last part of this, which is the startups. Thank you.
You all ready?
Why not?
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I'm the one who was put on the spot earlier. I'm Dave Koech. I'm the Chief Scientist of Ocean Visions, and I'm really excited that you're all sticking around for this last part of the session today. When people ask me what's the most exciting thing that's happening in marine carbon dioxide removal, and what's happened over the last few years that really gives me hope, it's this steady and constant march from ideation into implementation. And that's what we're gonna see in these 6 startup pitches today. These are people putting things in the water, doing real testing, and really contributing to an environment of accelerated research and development. And so I think what you're gonna see is a really nice complement to what you saw in the first part of the session, which were some really important themes, many of which were at a very high level, thinking about systems changes and global changes that are needed, and now we're gonna really zoom down to a smaller level, to the individual level of a project or a company, to understand the progress that some of these cutting-edge startups are making, some of the opportunities they see, and some of the challenges they see as well. We have 6 startups here. They're each gonna have 5 minutes, and I really have to hold everybody to that because I've been told that we have to be out of the room by noon. So without further ado, let's get started. The first company that we're gonna hear from is Planetary Technologies, and Planetary neutralizes carbon dioxide with a mineral antacid, in effect removing it permanently from the atmosphere and restoring the ocean's chemistry. We're going to hear from Mike Kelland, their CEO. Mike, let's see, has a history of creating and nurturing innovative corporate cultures and a passion for environmental solutions. I'll let him tell you more about Planetary and the really great work that they're doing in Halifax Harbor and beyond. Okay, Mike, take it away.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks everybody for giving me 5 minutes here to talk about Planetary. I think we're going to throw the video that we have up.
Yeah, one more slide. Oh yeah. Oh, Mike, sorry. Here you go.
Oh, I get to do this?
No, I think you just have a video, right?
I just have a video. Yeah. Okay. So let's mute that and make sure it's not playing sound.
Planetary's demonstration site is located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, at the Tufts Cove Power Generating Station, where our ocean alkalinity enhancement process is capable of removing...
Little sound icon. All right, right on. Okay, so my name is Mike Kelland. I am the CEO, co-founder of Planetary Technologies. What you see behind me is our actually last year demonstration of ocean alkalinity enhancement in a coastal region. So Planetary's mission is to restore the ocean and climate for generations to come. And the way that we do that is by adding a mineral antacid into seawater through existing outfalls. So our goal is to do essentially the simplest thing you can possibly do to remove carbon from the ocean atmosphere system and in the cheapest way possible without building any new infrastructure as much as possible as well. And we do this through a patented technology that can purify alkalinity, or essentially base, out of existing industrial byproducts, so stuff like what you see here, and essentially pull out that pure alkalinity that can be used under existing permits in coastal outfalls. And all of those words are pretty important. So the world produces about a gigaton, by 2050 it'll produce about 3 gigatons worth of CDR in byproducts that are being disposed of today. And if we extract that alkalinity and use it in the ocean, that will give us the highest scale potential way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. The coastal aspect as well, I think, is really important. There's been recent papers coming out that have said that coastally we can remove several gigatons a year around the world of carbon from the atmosphere using OAE. So there's been a lot of discussion about going offshore for these kinds of things, but we actually don't think that's necessary to get to a significant scale. We can probably do everything we need to do safely within the context of existing regulations on the coasts. So really trying to be very, very sort of incremental, responsible, engaged with academic community as we do these trials, but also trying to scale up with the urgency of the climate problem that we have behind us. And the fact that we're using that existing infrastructure has allowed us to move very, very quickly. So we removed our first 138 tons of carbon from the atmosphere on a net basis last year. And you can actually go onto our website and read our impact report and see all how we did that and how our projects have progressed over the last year in a very transparent way. So we're trying to be very engaged as we do that. In the process of that, we, I think, very much advanced the science within OAE in collaboration with Dalhousie University. And this year, we are seeing a lot of the fruits of that in our next phase of trial, which is part of our application for the CDR X Prize, where we're a top 20 finalist. So in that, one of the biggest things that we've seen so far is that we were able this year to actually directly measure air-sea gas exchange change as a result of what we were doing. So essentially, we were able to measure carbon coming out of the air as a result of adding alkalinity to the ocean, which is something that I think in a lot of cases we think is probably not supposed to be possible. But as we progress these field trials and we see how things work in real life, we can actually sort of start to see that a lot of the challenges in front of us are engineering challenges. And maintaining safety being paramount, we can actually really carefully control how we do this kind of work. What else can I say about it? I guess the last thing I would say is that I think that this is a space that is moving very, very, very rapidly. So if I was to leave you with one thing to think about on the OAE space leaving this session is, stay in touch with what's going on in the space, because as we progress these field trials, like I say, I think a lot of the sort of preconceived notions about how this system will work, how it will be safe, how it will be deployed at scale are gonna shift really, really fast. And we're really excited to be on the forefront of that, working with academic institutions like Dalhousie University, the University of Maryland, UBC, and Plymouth Marine Labs. So that's it from me, I think. Thanks very much.
That was a great start. We're actually ahead of schedule.
There you go.
After the first talk. Okay, next we're going to turn it over to Brilliant Planet. I just want to give you a brief intro on Brilliant Planet. Brilliant Planet grows marine microalgae on land in coastal ponds in hot deserts such as South Africa, Oman, and Morocco. It does this to create new net primary production in areas where nothing has grown before to remove atmospheric carbon dioxide. It dries and stores the carbon-containing microalgal biomass on land for durable carbon removal. To tell you more about MicroPlanet is founder and chief scientist Raphael Jovin. Raphael?
Yes, so thank you very much for having me. Ocean Visions builders, thank you very much. Amazing Bar Association. That's what we want to do. We want to replicate what happens in nature and coastal algal blooms for free every day all around the world. 20% of all global carbon gets removed by these coastal blooms. So we tried to figure out a system, as David mentioned, first in South Africa, then in Oman, now in Morocco. That's a 3-hectare site. You can see there are 2 greenhouses. It's a research site. There are 2 harvesting centers. What it is empty desert, unused ocean water that would not have otherwise come to the surface. And we then use that to grow algae in a 15-day cycle. The reason why I say that is 5 days in the lab, 5 days in a greenhouse, 5 days outside, 15 days of this very low fugacity, for those of you who care, very rapid carbon absorption, atmospheric carbon absorption system, where we then filter out the algae, and I'll show a picture in a second, to bury them on land. Now, we've been affectionately called amphibian carbon, because we are not really a marine CDR solution. We don't bury anything in the ocean, we don't store anything in the ocean, we use seawater to remove carbon dioxide and then store it on land. That has many advantages in the sense that everything is measurable, which is great. And you can see us harvesting right here. It's the biomass concentrating out of our pond water. And then you can see the rock vault with a bunch of the sensors where we then track this. We can guarantee that the biomass is not decaying. We've got all the positive controls, done a lot of sensor research just to be able to see that we can measure 0.015 grams of decay or less. Having said that, the water goes back into the ocean. And so there's always the question of what happens to that water, you know, the total life cycle assessment, pumping all that water. We are now finally in the final stages of validating a third-party monitoring, reporting, verification protocol, and we've got a lot of research in terms of what happens in the ocean with that water, with the finite volume community ocean model, where we can both anticipate and forecast the conditions so we can operate year-round. The magic of this system is that we take these algal blooms, we take that monoculture, that local organism, and we grow it year-round as opposed to in nature where you get these episodic blooms. What that means is that per unit area, we're 50 times more effective than a forest would be, a temperate forest. But yes, it's working. The other part to that is we can use that also as a single point discharge model to track exactly where our discharge goes, how fast it re-equilibrates with the ocean, how quickly it dilutes. Those yellow-orange skeins here are 10 orders of magnitude of dilution for a 200,000 ton per day discharge. It allows us to actually help quantify the restoration of the local environment, things like in our bays, in our communities, 3 years ago, because of ocean acidifications, oysters and mussels stopped growing, and the fishermen, the locals, really are excited about our discharge pipeline, which is covered in mussels, basically. And we're scaling up, we're engineering, and thank you also to the local team. This local knowledge issue is super helpful for us. Thank you. Did I make it?
Okay, next up we have CarbonBlue. CarbonBlue is developing a new technology for removing dissolved carbon dioxide in seawater. This technology can work with any water and does not require any water pretreatment, making it suitable for integration into existing water infrastructure, reducing costs, construction, and permitting time. To tell us more about CarbonBlue is CEO Dan DeVere.
So thank you for the introduction, Dave. That's basically half of what I wanted to say already. So I am Dan DeVere, the co-founder and CEO of CarbonBlue. And, here's the clicker. And we are a direct ocean capture company, actually the first one for today at least. And I will try to explain what it is. But before, let us get into the mood and show what we are doing that for. And you have seen that many, many times, so I would not bore you with details, but I do want you to take from that figure that the urgency is the rate of scale up. Because we don't need only to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or from the carbon cycle, but we have to do it in a way that would be scaled in just a few decades to become one of the largest industries worldwide. We are talking about, in terms of output, like the steel, cement, and oil combined. And to do that, and that's CarbonBlue's philosophy, and to do that, okay, I'm missing a slide, sorry. And to do that, our philosophy is to use existing infrastructure as much as possible to integrate into existing industries and to leverage it to scale up quickly. To do that, we have developed two technologies. The first technology is a technology to capture dissolved carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's what you see on the left, the mineralization reactor. It is very simple. Water comes in together with a mineral called lime, and the carbon dioxide comes out as a solid form, solid mineralized form that I hold over here. You can approach me later to see that up close. And the water, which is now decarbonated, will reabsorb over time carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that's the MRV problem that we've talked about it a lot today. But it's not enough, because lime is carbon intensive, so we want to produce our own lime while capturing, doing that in a green way, and we've developed a way to do that. It's called green calcination, basically taking up this calcium carbonate, this mineralized form, and renewable energy, either electricity or heat, releasing the carbon dioxide in a pure form, almost 100% stream that can be either utilized or sequestered, and then regenerate the lime for further cycles. The nice thing is those two pieces of technology can be located in different places and at different times, connecting between industries that use water and can be a source of green carbon dioxide to industries that are using carbon dioxide. Of course, the first ones are the geosequestration and mineralization industries to remove the carbon dioxide, but not only. It can be also the emerging synthetic carbon neutral fuels or plastics, or even carbonated beverage. The demand of carbon dioxide is increasing, it's only going to increase, and this is our vision for the future. But of course, we are starting small, and if you can see here, the desalination is actually both on the left and the right. That's because desalination is a consumer of carbon dioxide, but also holds lots of water. And this is our pilot that we are currently developing. It is going to be next year 400 tons per year capture facilities that will be provided to the desalination plant itself, instead of carbon dioxide from fossil sources. We are now building it, but using the water in our prototype, it informed our techno-economic assessment and life cycle analysis that led us to set those as goals for the large-scale future projects. we will deploy. The nice thing is that the land area requirement is small. That's because water is much more rich with carbon dioxide than the air, and that the capex leading to a relatively small capex. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, next up we have Vesta. Vesta is a public benefit corporation that aims to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere while making coastal protection more affordable for communities. Vesta's coastal carbon capture process utilizes olivine sand, an abundant, naturally occurring mineral which converts excess carbon dioxide into bicarbonate when placed in the ocean. To tell us more about this is Kelly Earhart, co-founder and president and now advisor to Vesta.
Hello, everyone. So as David mentioned, Vesta is a public benefit corporation that uses carbon-removing sand in coastal protection projects. We're all here today because we're very aware of the need for carbon dioxide removal, and we're very aware that the ocean presents an incredible opportunity to meet the gap that we currently have in carbon removal. But what many of us are not aware of, unless we live near a coastline, is that with sea levels rising and with storm surges increasing, coastal protection is becoming a much harder problem to solve. Coastal communities are at the front lines of climate change, and with all of these forces at play, it means that shoreline protection projects are facing a shortage of sand. Vesta's olivine sand can be implemented into coastal protection projects and provide communities with a needed sand. Because we can supplement the cost of sand by selling carbon removal, we can subsidize the cost for coastal communities, making it much more affordable and helping them meet their goals. We've seen significant interest from coastal communities across the country, and it's this unique co-benefit of coastal protection that allows us an opportunity to eventually reach a globally significant scale. And when it comes to working in the oceans, which are, of course, the commons, moving at the speed of trust is of utmost importance. And that means a careful approach to scale, leading with sound, independent science and deep community engagement. We have now deployed and completed 2 pilot projects, one in a salt marsh in Herring River, Massachusetts, and one just up the coast of here, a 500 cubic yard placement in Southampton, New York. Both of these projects have shown us little risk to the ecosystems, but that is something that we're going to be monitoring very closely as we work towards scale. Most exciting, we've recently deployed our largest project, which is a 6,500 cubic yard site up off the coast in North Carolina. That project is being independently monitored by Hourglass Climate, which is a nonprofit that provides services to the industry. If you haven't heard of them, Dr. Grace Andrews is actually in the room here, and I highly recommend you speak with her and her team. The project's also being monitored and supported by the Army Corps of Engineers Research and Development Center, as well as the Coastal Studies Institute. That monitoring is already returning really promising data that Hourglass is beginning to share with the world, and we recently saw that the data is showing us that we are indeed removing carbon. Next, I'll share a short video, and I actually will ask that the sound is on if you're able to do that. So as mentioned, the data from this project will be shared publicly, including in peer-reviewed publications. We're also in the early planning stages for our next deployment, in which one of the main goals is to demonstrate the coastal protection benefits of olivine sand. We've come a long way at Vesta, but there's still a lot to learn, and we're really excited to be doing that with all of you. Thank you.
Just want to say here for a moment, I think it's really interesting to watch the videos that Mike and Kelly have showed, because they really show that at its core, carbon removal is about moving a lot of material, right? We have to move gigatons of carbon dioxide that are in the atmosphere into geologic reservoirs, into ocean reservoirs, and fundamentally that's going to involve a lot of heavy industry. And so it's really important that we remember that and think about what that means in the context of our global society. Now we're going to hear from Ebb Carbon. Ebb Carbon's mission is to remove billions of tons of excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. To achieve this, the team is pioneering a CDR approach called electrochemical ocean alkalinity enhancement, which boosts the ocean's natural ability to safely capture and store carbon by removing excess acid from seawater. And to tell us more about this is Frances Simpson-Allen, Head of Policy and Market Development at Ebb Carbon.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Frances. As David just let you know, I'm with Ebb Carbon. You will know why we're here, to remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Critically, though, there's many ways we can do this. There's been a lot of discussion this morning about the potential of marine carbon removal and the research still needed around it. I think one important piece that hasn't been discussed is the great work that's already been done. One of them being NOAA's report that came out last year on the strategy for carbon removal research. They looked at cost, scale, and durability. Think about the quality of carbon removed matters when we're at gigaton scale. So a fantastic resource to direct you all to at the beginning. Let me explain a little bit about how Ebb's system works. So at a very high level, we filter seawater from the ocean and remove the hydrochloric acid from within there, returning back to the ocean a more alkaline version of that same seawater. So as folks have already explained this morning, that allows the ocean to do what it has been doing for many millennia, and would ultimately get to if humans would only move to another planet or stop emitting any kind of CO2. And so we really think about this as being the best of nature married with the best of technology. Today, Ebb is piloting this technology and pumping our own water. At scale, we'll integrate with existing industries. As David just said, there's a huge amount of movement you have to think about to get to scale. For Ebb, we're not moving materials or minerals, we're moving seawater. Today, one country's desalination, I think I can say, in the Middle East, can remove 1 billion tons of CDR if only integrated with Ebb's technology. And that's the state of the industry today. So we see tremendous potential. But what I want to talk to you about today is really how we approach deployment. Someone said earlier that the real trick in figuring all of this out is actually building the deployments, building these pilots, and going through all of the challenges that entails. So here's a little history of Ebb Carbon. Ebb is founded on the back of over a decade of research by one of our co-founders, Dr. Matt Eiserman. We have been demonstrating our technology in partnership with the Department of Energy and NOAA, as well as the University of Washington, up at the Pacific National Northwest Laboratory in Sequim, Washington. We're currently in that painful stage of developing a project down the road in Port Angeles, Washington. We have permits. You can get a permit to do mCDR deployments. It's painful, it's expensive, it's hard work, but as it should be, right? We want to make sure that we have the appropriate oversight and safeguards so that there is no unintended consequences from any of this work. At the same time, we're developing a pilot overseas integrated with existing industry. And as we think about this, there's really two core components to this work of deployment. Number one is safety. If we don't do this safely in the first instance, we will not do it safely at scale. And if we don't do this safely today, we lose the right to try again in the future. So safety comes first in everything. For Ebb, safety is both a practice and a perception. So engaging community and stakeholders is critical to building that baseline. Secondly, efficacy. We know that with most forms of marine carbon removal, you're not left holding a ton of CO2. We have to be very, very clever and very, very detailed about how we're doing that measurement, reporting, and verification. And I'll share more about that as well. At scale, if you've read the NOAA report or indeed the National Academy of Sciences report, you know that marine-based methods for carbon removal hold outsized potential for under $100 per ton at scale. Someone said the markets aren't rational, investors aren't rational. If they were, mCDR would have the $7 billion that DAC has recently got from the government. More to come, I'm sure. But so here we are at Sequim, Washington. I really have to shout out to our partners at the Department of Energy and NOAA, as well as University of Washington and Climate Works. Do we have a fire alarm? Do we? Is it real? We need to go? Okay. Stay safe. Take your pieces.
Fun times.
Yeah, great time. First time that's happened to you?